My name is Elias Turner. I am 108 years old. I had to say that slowly just now because sometimes even I don't quite believe it. 108 years is a long time for a heart to keep beating, a long time for memories to pile up inside a person. The doctor told me last week that my body is tired. That was the word he used. Not broken, just tired. I suppose that makes sense. Most nights now I sit here in this chair by the window. The house is quiet in a way it never used to be. I can hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the clock in the hallway ticking like it has something important to prove. I decided to record this tonight because I feel something approaching. Not fear, exactly, just the sense that the road ahead is getting shorter. And there are things I never said out loud. Not to my children, not to my wife when she was still here, not even to myself, if I'm being honest. When you live this long, people expect you to have wisdom. They expect grand lessons about life. But most of what I have are moments, small ones, moments that stayed with me longer than I expected. I was born in 1918, a small farmhouse outside a town that barely exists anymore. Dirt roads, cold winters, and a father who believed a man's value was measured by how long he could work without sitting down. My earliest memory is watching my mother knead bread at the kitchen table. Her hands moved slowly, gently. I remember flour floating in the sunlight that came through the window. At the time, it felt ordinary. Most things that matter do. My father died when I was 19. Heart stopped while he was repairing a fence. One moment he was hammering, the next he was lying in the grass looking confused, like he had forgotten something important. I remember standing there, not knowing what to do with my hands. After that, everything moved quickly. Work, responsibility, the farm. Life has a way of pushing you forward before you have time to understand what's happening. When I was 23, I met Margaret. She had dark hair and a laugh that made people turn their heads. The first time I saw her, she was standing outside the town grocery store, arguing with the clerk because he had shorted her 2 apples. She was stubborn in a way that made the world feel brighter. We married 6 months later. Looking back now, 6 months feels like the blink of an eye, but at 23 it felt like forever. The early years were loud and messy and alive. Children running through the house, Margaret singing while she cooked, the smell of soap and rain and coffee. I worked long days back then, longer than I needed to. I told myself it was for the family, for security, for the future. That word, future, it kept me busy for decades. I remember one evening very clearly. Our oldest daughter must have been 5. She came into the barn while I was fixing a tractor tire. She held up a drawing she had made, crayon lines, crooked stick figures. She stood there quietly, waiting for me to look. I told her, just a minute. I meant it, but tires take longer than you think. When I finally walked back to the house, she was asleep on the couch, the drawing still in her hand. I don't remember what the drawing looked like, but I remember the feeling in my chest when I realized I had missed it. Back then, I told myself there would be other drawings, other evenings. Life always feels like it has more time, and for a while it does. But the strange thing about years is how quietly they disappear. You don't notice it while it's happening. You only notice later, when the house gets quieter, when the children grow older and their voices move somewhere else, and when you start realizing that many of the moments you thought were ordinary were actually the only ones you were ever going to get. There was a winter when I was 42 that I remember more clearly than most. The snow was heavy that year. It pressed down on the roof and turned the world quiet in that thick, muffled way snow does. Margaret and I sat at the kitchen table after the children had gone to bed, just the two of us. That didn't happen often back then. Life in your 40s is full of motion, bills, repairs, school events, work that always seems urgent. But that night the power had gone out during the storm. No lights, no radio, just a candle between us. I remember watching the flame move while she talked about something simple. I think it was about our youngest learning to whistle. I don't remember the story itself. I remember the way her face looked in that candlelight, soft, patient, familiar in the way only decades can make a person. At some point she stopped talking and just looked at me. "You're far tonight," she said. I told her I was just tired. That was a word I used often in those years. Tired, busy, later. Those 3 words can fill up an entire life. Margaret passed away when I was 74, a quiet morning in early spring. She had been sitting by the same window I'm sitting beside now, watching the birds in the yard. She closed her eyes like she was resting, and that was it. After 74 years of breathing, the room suddenly felt enormous without her. The strange thing about grief isn't the crying, it's the silence afterward, the chair that stays empty, the extra cup that never gets used again. For a long time I walked through the house expecting to hear her voice from the next room. The mind takes a while to understand what the heart already knows. In the years after she died, time changed shape. Days stretched longer, nights even longer than that. I began remembering things I hadn't thought about in decades. Little moments. Her standing in the doorway with flour on her cheek. The way she hummed while folding laundry. The night she stayed awake with our son when he had a fever, even though she had work the next morning. Things I barely noticed when they were happening. Those were the things that came back. Not the promotions, not the long hours, not the worries that once felt so heavy. Just moments. By the time I reached 90, most of the people I grew up with were gone. Friends disappeared one by one like lights switching off in distant houses. At funerals, people would shake my hand and say things like, "You've lived such a long life," and I would nod politely. But inside, I kept thinking the same quiet thought. It never feels long while you're living it. Life doesn't feel like a century. It feels like a collection of afternoons, a handful of ordinary Tuesdays, conversations you barely remember having. And then one day you wake up and realize most of them are already behind you. I used to think the end of life would feel dramatic, something loud, something frightening. But lately it feels more like standing at the edge of a quiet field at sunset, the light slowly fading, nothing rushing, just the understanding that the day is nearly done. A few months ago, my grandson visited with his little boy. The child must be 4 years old, maybe 5. Children that age carry the same energy my daughter had when she ran into the barn with that drawing all those years ago. He wandered through the house, touching everything, running his fingers along the old wooden table, opening cabinets like he was exploring a museum. At one point, he climbed into my lap without asking, just decided that was where he belonged. Children are like that. They don't negotiate with life the way adults do. He pointed at the wrinkles on my hands. "Why are they like that?" he asked. I told him they've been here a long time. He nodded like that made perfect sense. Then he asked me if I was going to die soon. Children ask questions adults are too polite to say out loud. I thought about it for a moment, and I told him the truth. Yes, I said, probably. He looked at me carefully, studying my face the way children do when they're deciding if something is scary. Then he shrugged. Okay, he said, and a moment later he was distracted by a toy car on the floor. That was the end of the conversation, but it stayed with me. Not the question, the simplicity of it. For most of my life, death felt like something distant, something waiting far away at the end of a road I couldn't see yet. But when you reach my age, it doesn't feel like an enemy anymore. It feels familiar, like a train that has finally reached the last station after a very long ride. You step off slowly, stretch your legs, look around. I'm not afraid of it, not because I'm brave, and not because I understand everything about what comes next.